Nick, appreciate it. I guess I just want to start by thanking Nick, Becca, and Ella over at Numbers for Nonprofits for giving us the opportunity here today. We really appreciate the chance to share how McClone partners with nonprofits and the kind of value that we strive to bring to the organizations that we work with. So I'll start out by introducing myself. My name is Jacob Heyroth. I have been with McClone's business development team for almost 2 years now. And over time, I've found myself really drawn to working with nonprofits, especially here in the Madison area. It's a space that I'm passionate about, and I love being able to support organizations that are doing meaningful work in our community. So, Brad, I'll give it to you, and you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, everyone, for giving us the time in the audience here to share some information with you. My name is Brad DeLeeuw. I am our VP of Business Development here at McClone. I've been here just a shade over 5 years. And much like Jacob, super passionate about nonprofits. We'll talk a little bit about that more as we get into the presentation. But in many ways, nonprofits all over the state are kind of who made us who we are. So, we almost feel a responsibility to help them out whenever we can. So I will, like Nick said, if anyone has a question, just raise your hand on the Teams thing and someone will monitor that and see, or you can throw something in the chat as well, but certainly want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me. I can get a little bit long-winded. So I'm going to jump right in. And if anything happens weird with the technology as we're going along, just let me know. But again, that's Jacob and I. Quick agenda of what we're going to walk through today. We'll talk a little bit about the stakes for nonprofits. We'll talk about organizational risk. We'll talk about what we call the 4 pillars of resilience, really important things to just consider as employees of nonprofits or directors of nonprofits. A checklist to take back to the board. A lot of times what we've found is when folks present on a topic, they present on the topic and everyone kind of walks away from it and thinks, well, now what? We like having CTAs, or what we call call to action. We like being able to give you something to take back to your board or to other folks at the nonprofit to start meaningful dialogue. And then I'll talk a little bit about, this certainly isn't an all about McClone thing, but I think it's important for us to talk about how we partner with nonprofits and what we kind of see what works best in the marketplace.
And Brad, just to let everybody know, we can share this after the fact. We've been given permission to share this, so you don't have to all take vicious notes right now. We'll be circulating this back around afterward. So thank you for that as well.
Yep. Yeah. Really good point. We'll definitely share it. So first, I think, this one kind of goes without saying. We've never walked into a nonprofit that we work with or want to work with and had someone say, like, you know what, I really don't have enough to do here. Nonprofit leaders are wearing a ton of hats, right? Your fundraising, which is a huge part of what many nonprofits are doing. You likely have to manage staff and or others. And then, reporting up to the board, whether that's on a quarterly, monthly, or annual basis is going to be really important because you need to make sure that you need to be able to have a legacy, right? You need to be sustainable, and you need to be able to do that so that your mission continues and you can continue to provide what you're providing for the geography that you're in and potentially beyond. As an example, we work with some Boys and Girls Clubs, some Girl Scout groups, some YMCAs, some Habitat for Humanity, some community foundations, and all of them, I can probably say without any exceptions, are looking to make things more effective and efficient. Because in order to be sustainable, you have to do that. So we do our best to try to help folks do that. A little bit about what's at stake, right? A lot of people think nonprofits, and we're not worried about P&L, and we're not worried about profit margin. We're not worried about how much does this widget cost, but there are high stakes for nonprofits, as all of you know. You've got a budget to manage. You're delivering critical services to the communities and beyond. You oftentimes don't have a litany of resources at your disposal. At the end of the day, you guys are running lean. And when you're running lean like that, there's not a ton of room for error, quite frankly, because you've got, too much to focus on to be worried about looking in the rearview mirror, or looking to the left, looking to the right to make sure that there aren't mistakes and errors being made. You kind of have to just keep looking forward through the windshield and have confidence that the way that you're doing things and the partners that you're choosing to do things with are helping you along the way. Continuity, again, much like sustainability, is very important. If that's disrupted in any way, there's a cost that is more than just monetary in nature. I'll just use an example. We work with the Community Foundation of the Fox Valley up here. I sit up here in the Fox Cities, which is our corporate headquarters is in Menasha, Wisconsin. So we work with a lot of nonprofits up here, one of them being the Community Foundation. They, through their doors in a given year, they're looking at probably $25 to $30 million that are getting dispersed throughout the community. If they experience a loss from a risk standpoint, or something happens, that impacts trust, right? And if they want to continue to generate donations and be able to serve this community and the communities beyond just the Fox Valley, that's a big risk to take. And that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean, and we'll get into some of these as we go on, it can mean things like natural disasters. So we live in, we don't have to worry about some, which is great, but we do have others. We have hailstorms. We have lightning that takes out power for days at a time. Unfortunately, we're in an area, and even down by Jacob, more so in the Madison area, where tornadoes have been relatively prevalent over the last couple of years. And all of those things, when you think about, let's say, a manufacturing business, if a manufacturing plant gets taken out by a tornado, that's their business income that's being affected. And they're going sometimes days or weeks or months without business income. So we've got to think of ways to take care of that from a risk standpoint. But for nonprofits, still are affected, although you're not generating money for the company every single day. You still need to be able to operate in a manner that makes sense for all of you. So natural disasters are certainly something. Data breaches, we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. I know Nick had also mentioned talking about cyber, so we'll cover that a little bit. I don't want to scare everybody, but the cyberspace is a scary space right now, and there's no doubt about being intentional about putting a focus on how to try to mitigate that. And again, just kind of reiterating that, the trust is fragile, especially when the community is relying on you to be able to provide for them. So this is where you'll kind of see the takeaways. So at the bottom of this slide now, you see what we will call and just reference as a board question. So this is kind of one of the things to take away, and you'll see these throughout the presentation. And when we talk about the stakes for nonprofits, we're talking about kind of those disruptions, leadership gaps, natural disasters, data breaches. So a question that you don't have to jot down because you're going to get this presentation, but you can if you want. A question to ask the board would be to say, hey, if we had a major disruption tomorrow, if we had a ransomware attack or a cyber attack or a windstorm took the roof off the building, God forbid, what would the next 90 days look like for us? Do we have a contingency plan in place? Are we thinking about the communities that we're impacting and whether we'll still be able to do what they're expecting us to do should we have some sort of disruption? So this might seem like an obvious one, honestly, but you would be surprised how many nonprofits we've sat with and said something to the effect of, if your executive director left tomorrow, that they won the lottery, right? I always hate when people use the, you got hit by a bus or you fell off the face of the earth or something. I like using more positive things when for people not wanting to stay in their job. So let's say your executive director won the lottery tomorrow. Maybe that person would continue to work, but maybe they wouldn't. So do you have a plan in place if that sort of thing would happen? So again, just something to kind of think about and take back to your board and generate some meaningful dialogue about. Next, talk about some common blind spots for nonprofits. So certainly from an operational standpoint, we kind of already talked about this in a prior slide, but these are certainly things that have to be at the forefront of not only the employees of the nonprofit, but also the board. So financial controls being in place. You have to think about fraud. You have to think about, I mean, it's sad to think about, but every quarter, if not month, we hear about some either for-profit or nonprofit having a case of embezzlement. And so obviously, what does that do? That goes back to what we talked about earlier with that building trust and keeping trust within the community. Lack of governance or succession planning. Again, kind of already referenced a little bit earlier, but do you have succession planning laid out, right? So if the executive director or someone else in a managerial position or someone on the board decides to leave or their term is up, how are you gonna reconcile for that, and what kind of plan are you gonna have in place so that you don't halt operations and you don't become stagnant just because one person left the organization? Have a plan in place and kind of have we call it bench strength, right? We use a lot of sports analogies here, so we call it having really good bench strength. And then, mishandling grant or donor restrictions reporting. This is obviously, I mean, you guys know this. I'm not telling you something that you don't know, but and when it comes to the unrestricted or restricted donations, having really good policies and best practices outlined within your nonprofit to make sure that those are being handled accordingly. On the right there, you'll see a bit of a case study. We engaged in a dialogue with a nonprofit who was in a situation where we went through an identification process with them, which is really important to us. We don't just want to come in and say to a nonprofit or any company for that matter, yes, we can for sure help you, because we actually don't know. And we would never just assume that we can, we have something that can help you. But we came in and went through an identification process, and we found that this particular nonprofit had a financial officer with sole signatory authority, right? And when you don't have the proper checks and balances in place, that can lead to some sticky situations, to say the least. So kind of here is another place where we have another call to action, another board question. And you can see it there. Do we have redundancy for key roles in financial oversight? If a leader or controller left tomorrow, what gaps would be exposed? And the important thing to note here is this is both people related and systems. So I'm glad that we put both people and systems in there, because certainly this can be an effect of, like we have continued to talk about, in a director leaving or a board member resigning or another key employee leaving. But it also has to do with systems. And that kind of goes into the checks and balances of making sure that everything is on the up and up, and that you're not exposing yourself to potential risks by overlooking things that might seem obvious, but might just be. A lot of times what we'll find is the best thing to do isn't always the easiest thing to do. So a lot of times we'll come into an organization and they'll say, well, this is not going to surprise any of you. Well, this is just the way we've always done it, right? And 40 years ago when this nonprofit started, we just set it up this way, and we've always done it that way because we figured what could go wrong, right? And sure, you can probably get by for a little bit without much going wrong, but at some point, unfortunately, we're kind of in the business of it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. At some point, large or small, every organization is probably going to experience some loss of some sort as it relates to risk. So really taking that board question to go back to your key employees in the board and saying, like, what will happen if this happens? What will we do, right? And I think that's something really important to think about. So moving on to people and culture risks. So I don't think it's any surprise that culture is really important. Listen to any keynote speaker, listen to any TED talk, and at some point you'll come across how important people and culture are. And I don't say that flippantly. I mean, it's for sure true, right? It's, the concept exists for a reason. We are no different here at McClone. Without our people, we do not operate and function. Insurance is, we do not see it as a commodity. We see it as very much a people and relationship business. At the end of the day, people are humans and they want to do business with people they like and organizations that have a culture that they can align with. So as you're kind of thinking about that, think about how important culture is to not only your nonprofit, but think about how important your culture is and how it's viewed in the communities that you're in. Turnover is tough. Turnover happens, right? And sometimes some turnover is good turnover. But really going back to the previous slide even a little bit and talking about succession planning, having something in place, because turnover is expensive. You'll see studies and calculations out there all over the place. I think some people say, the cost of turnover is, 50% of the person's salary that you're going to be bringing in. Others estimate it to be, 200% of the salary for the person that you're bringing in. It's honestly probably somewhere in the middle, and it is going to depend on the organization and the industry and maybe even the geography that you're in. But really, that's something important to think about, particularly in the nonprofit space, because if someone leaves, right, we're already talking about organizations where people are wearing 5, 6, 7, 8 hats. Somebody leaves, that just adds one extra thing for someone to worry about. So just really making sure you're intentional about that as well. There's a little bit about benefits here. And I recognize that, and we at McClone recognize that not every nonprofit can even offer benefits, and some don't, because they don't have the budget for it. Maybe they believe that they're too small of an organization to even offer benefits. There are a lot of reasons, and sometimes the reasons are good reasons, and it makes sense to not offer them. But there are times when it makes sense to have more of an exploratory discussion to see if there is a way to offer something to the employees, even if it's not, as grand and robust as what a for-profit organization might be able to offer their employees. But we do very much believe here that it's all about communication, education, and consumerism. So studies have shown this, and we talk about this all the time with folks. You could have the absolute best benefit package in the world, but if you communicate it poorly, no one will know or think that it's the best insurance package in the world. Conversely, you could have average or subpar benefit offerings, but if you communicate the heck out of them and turn your employees into good consumers of healthcare, I'll say, for lack of a better way to describe it, that is much, much better received than the alternative that I spoke about earlier. So if I can give a piece of advice in this space, and it probably is obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. No matter what your benefits are, whether you perceive them to be good or bad or average or below benchmark or above benchmark, take the time to figure out and work with someone on how to best communicate and educate your employees and your staff members on what is actually available to them. It goes a really long way in helping culture for sure. And then so just some people and culture risks here, the board question to take back. And I believe these might be all summarized at the end as well. But again, we're going to share this deck with you as well. The board question here, do we have a clear policy around volunteer roles, injuries, and benefit insurance exposure? So again, just making sure those checks and balances are in place. If any of you wear the HR hat at your nonprofit, you know that the three most important things in HR are documentation, documentation, and documentation. And again, that's a cliche for a reason because it's very true. So just making sure you have the right policies in place when it comes to all of the things that relate to people and culture.
I think we've got our first question, Brad.
Oh yeah, sure, right on.
Yeah, is volunteer work covered under workers' comp in Wisconsin?
It depends how you have the policy set up. So Wisconsin is a state. There are a few states, more than a few. There are many states where the state sets the work comp rate. Wisconsin is one of them. It depends how you're classifying them internally. So if you're using it depends on work comp code, right? And I would be lying to you if I said I could get into the minutiae and the details of work comp codes. We have a team of commercial insurance risk advisors here that I would probably tap into to talk more about whether or not a particular person or a group of people at one nonprofit or another would be covered under work comp, but it really all boils down to the work comp codes and what are they truly doing? How much of their time is spent doing one task as it relates to another? Are they in a role where even though they're a volunteer, they have to make independent, decision-making processes? So if you have a particular instance or question, just connect with us offline. Happy to kind of review and talk about what your particular situation is, but that's kind of how I would attack that one. Good question. Driving into the benefits piece a little bit deeper here. I won't go too deep into this because we kind of already covered a lot of the benefit piece and even tied it into employee retention as it relates to communication, education, and consumerism. But what you are seeing, right? So this is again not something that is going to be new to you. If you're trying to attract and retain people, your benefit offerings are going to be compared to benefit offerings in the for-profit space. And at a lot of times what happens then is you need to be able to do something that differentiates yourself. And the good news is there are a lot of levers that can be pulled that sometimes nonprofits don't think about because they think about the cost of it only. But what we've seen in a lot of instances for us in the relationships that we have with nonprofits is sometimes there are things that can be offered that cost not very much, or that the cost is minimal but passed on to the employee. So it's 100% employee paid, but it's not a large line item cost. So simply offering it and saying like, hey, we're going to offer, vision is a pretty good example. Vision insurance isn't really it doesn't have to be that expensive. So a lot of nonprofits that we work with will offer vision insurance, but they'll have it be 100% employee paid, or they'll have it be 90% employee paid, and they'll pay 10% of the premium. And oftentimes that equates to, depending upon the size of the nonprofit, dollars a month. We're not talking about things that cost thousands of dollars, right? So really, taking a really intentional look at what you are offering now, if anything, and doing an exploratory exercise on what else is out there. There are, if you get, messages in your inbox about the newest, this new benefit plan and this new benefit plan and this new offering and that new offering, and everyone's always got a silver bullet and a new shiny thing that's being offered by some vendor, right? But if you took a meeting with every single vendor or company that wanted to propose to you that you should offer a certain benefit to your employees, your entire week would be filled up with just those vendor meetings talking about what new great thing that they have that can save you guys money. So really just having, again, it just goes back to having a partner that can help you walk through those things. And undoubtedly, I'm sure you guys have those in place. So that's helpful as well. Compliance is also really important. Again, I won't go into the minutia of the compliance piece, but depending upon your size, there are varying levels of compliance and state and federal reporting that have to be done. And this is where HR comes in and is really important. And I would say more often than not, we provide some level of HR support to most of our nonprofits, simply because, again, it goes back to the you don't have endless budgets, and you can't hire an HR director for a 10-person, 20-person nonprofit and pay them $150,000 a year. It's just not how life works, right? So we understand that and know that, particularly in this space, HR is a place that people need a lot of assistance. Just to kind of double down on that, HR and legal compliance landmines, misclassification of I'll just say people that work within your organization or for your organization is oftentimes something that happens. So not just as it relates to what work comp class code are you using for your employees, but even something as simple as classifying people as exempt or non-exempt, classifying people as managers, or classifying people as whatever different other employment categories you have within your particular organization. So if an audit were to happen by the IRS or the DOL, right, they're going to come in and with a fine-tooth comb see, do you have everyone classified properly? And if you don't, again, not to scare everyone into thinking something terrible is going to happen, but fines can go into place. You may have to pay penalties. You may have to pay back wages to someone if you had them misclassified as an employee or a contractor or an intern or whatever the case may be. Outdated handbooks and inconsistent policies present legal challenges. This is a really good example, and this happens a lot more than you might think. We run into instances a lot where a company or an organization or a nonprofit will have a handbook, and we'll say like, hey, when's the last time you updated your handbook? And they'll say, oh, we add some stuff to it every now and again, but we haven't really done a full review in 5 years, right? That's way too long, right? With how regularly state and federal policies and best practices change, you've got to do that way more often. So honestly, I would say this is one of the pieces that we dig into a lot with the nonprofits that we work with. A lot of times what we'll find is, I hate to use disciplinary action for one, but I'll use disciplinary action as an example. We'll say like, well, what happens if this person violates this particular thing? And they'll say, well, the first thing we do is a verbal warning. And then the next thing we do is a written warning. And then the next thing we do is we give them 3 days off with 3 unpaid days off as a punishment, or whatever the case may be. And then they'll say like, yeah, that's what we've always done here. And then we'll go to the handbook, and the disciplinary process will be something completely different than what they've just outlined. So again, maybe legal challenges, but maybe not necessarily legal challenges, but more so culture challenges can be presented with that. But sometimes it does kind of dovetail into legal challenges. Harassment, discrimination, ADA, FMLA compliance lapses. These are, unfortunately, these are something that have continued to run rampant. Before I started at McClone 5 years ago, I was in corporate HR for about 12 years. And this was something that, not just daily, but multiple times daily, it seemed like we were dealing with. So EEOC complaints at nonprofits are something that unfortunately happens a lot. We see instances where someone requested an accommodation at work, and the nonprofit or for-profit, doesn't matter, just pick your category or industry, didn't, even though it was reasonable accommodation, they didn't do it. So that can oftentimes lead to some problems legally as well. Letting someone go if they are or perceive themselves to be in a protected class. There's no shortage of those stories these days, and examples of when that's happening as well. So there was actually, I want to say, at least up here in the Fox Valley, probably 10 years ago, there was a small group of people who were intentionally seeking out job postings that they knew they could catch someone in a loophole with the EEOC, that they would apply for jobs with, get hired with, subsequently do just enough to get fired, but nothing nefarious, but just enough to get fired, and then go back and sue the company and say, when I applied for this job, this is what it said in the job description, and this is what was outlined, and you fired me for this reason. I am in a protected class, and I'm going to sue you for who knows how much money. And this happened for years before some local folks kind of got involved and tried to help remedy it. But certainly something that unfortunately happens all the time. The board question here, kind of simple and goes back to something I said earlier. When did we last review our HR policies for legal compliance? And have we done any gap analysis? So really just making sure. A lot of times nonprofits will have, I know that most nonprofits try to do a good job of picking board members who have an area of expertise, right? We try to pick someone maybe who has a finance background, or who's a controller or CFO somewhere, or someone who has legal resources or is a legal resource themselves to help with that, but certainly can't understate the importance, or can't overstate the importance of that.
And Brad, before going on to the next, could you briefly share with the group how McClone HR can come in and help an organization?
Yep, you bet.
With those HR functions?
Yep, so for sure. Just really briefly, we have a HR consulting arm at McClone, and the easiest way to explain it is anyone who is a client in any aspect of McClone's has access to our HR consulting practice. So that means, I'll call it phone a friend, for lack of a better way to describe it. Some employee relation situation comes up and you're not sure how to handle it. Okay, great. You're a client of ours for commercial insurance or for employee benefits or whatever the case may be. Call our HR consulting team. They'll walk you through it. We have an internal attorney that is a McClone employee that works for us as well. And they walk through it. And again, not to sound, I don't by any means stretch of the imagination want this to sound salesy, but it is important to know because you're nonprofits and you have budget constraints. Our HR consulting group, from a support standpoint, and our legal support we don't charge our clients, by the hour or by the quarter hour to get that sort of help. So we recognize that in the nonprofit and the for-profit space, people need that sort of help, and they don't want to have to pay someone to do it for them. So that's kind of how the McClone HR consulting piece. There's a technology and payroll piece of it that ties it in as well, but that's not really pertinent to this topic. But that's just a little bit about the McClone HR piece and how that kind of ties in and how we help our clients with that. So real quickly, I could talk for the entire hour about cyber disasters and reputational damage. At the end of the day, I mean, even our own clients, candidly speaking, I think in the last 8 weeks, we've probably had at least one client have some sort of cyber attack, data breach, ransomware, and it's not fun. Thankfully, if you have the right risk management process and profile in place, you can help. It helps, but it doesn't take away the sting of having it happen. At the end of the day, what has happened is, and this is a crazy and scary thing, and we have a lot of cyber experts that we work with, and some of you might know this, but the scariest piece about this is there are, I think, somewhere between 5 and 7 cyber criminal groups. And the scariest part about that is the FBI and every department under the sun actually know about the 5, 6, or 7 cyber attack groups that exist globally, and they don't break them up. And the reason they don't break them up, and this is, again, I don't mean this isn't funny by any stretch of the imagination, but the reason that they don't break them up is because if they broke up the 5 to 7 groups, cyber terrorist groups that existed, then they would have 40. Because the people that are a part of the 5 to 7, those who get busted up and broken up, and then they would all just go start smaller ones. And that's a really scary thing to think about. They actually, I don't know if any of you have, I hope none of you have experienced this, but maybe some of you have. Some of our clients have for sure experienced this. They actually have call centers. So the cyber terrorism groups have call centers. And we've had clients who have had something pop up on their computer screen when they logged on in the morning and basically said, we have all your data. We want $5 million. Call this number and pay us, send us a wire transfer, Bitcoin, whatever the case is, and we'll go away. And the FBI and other entities within the US, they know about these call centers also, but they don't, they monitor them, but they don't take swift action to break them up, right? So a really scary thing, when I found out the whole call center thing, it blew my mind that cyber terrorism groups had call centers where you would call and literally a customer service person would pick up and say, yep, I'm ready to take your I'm ready to take your payment for your ransomware. It's absolutely crazy. So there are a lot of pieces of advice that I would give nonprofits and for-profits as it relates to cyber attacks. But the biggest one is if you have cyber in place now, great. If it's a throw-in cyber policy with your commercial package, it's probably not enough. This day and age, a standalone cyber policy is incredibly important. So if you have one, good. If you don't, get one. It has become, even over the last 3 years, increasingly harder to get good cyber coverage in place. And the requirements to get coverage in place have continued to grow. So again, just really important to make sure that you have the correct risk management program in place as it relates to cyber. Honestly, it's 95% of the time it's an employee that clicks something that they shouldn't have clicked when they open an email, or it says, hey, click here to redeem your $500 Amazon gift card, or an email comes from who they think is the executive director saying, hey, I'm in a pinch and I need this from you. Can you send it to me as soon as you can? So again, just not that employees, all of the time are never trying to do something intentionally to harm a profit or a nonprofit or a for-profit company, but we get caught up in, we're busy and we click things and we go to things and that can cause a lot of problems. And obviously the reputational damage of that is something that's really important as well. The board question here: have we identified our top external threats and tested our readiness or response plans? A lot of times a cyber carrier will not only, they'll provide education to your employees. So they may provide free IT training to all of your employees, but they'll also do mock cyber attacks. So they'll do a mock cyber attack and they won't tell you when or how it's going to happen, but they'll do it. And then they'll see how prepared were you and did you have the right things in place in order to mitigate that. Board member risks and governments. Again, this is probably something that most of you have already reviewed and know, but directors and officers coverage is really important. Sometimes we've seen this get overlooked because people think, well, if I have employment practices insurance and I have management liability insurance and I have fiduciary liability insurance, I'm good, right? And directors and officers coverage is also very important. And there's a misconception sometimes in the marketplace about what actual directors and officers coverage is. A lot of times people will think it's coverage for if a bad decision is made by a director or officer of the organization. And that's a small part of it. But actually what directors and officers coverage does is it protects the personal assets of the directors and officers of the organization from being litigated against. So as an example, let's say you terminate someone and they file a claim in a lawsuit against your nonprofit because they're a protected class and you fired them for an unjustified, you fired them because the reason being they were in this protected class in some way, shape, or form. So they talk to an attorney and the attorney says, yep, we're gonna throw everything at them that we can. So they'll sue you and it will go to your management liability policy because it will say, was this decision made for this reason, that reason, another reason? But then the directors and officers coverage will oftentimes also go pulled into play because if the person is really greedy and really out for blood, they'll also come after the personal assets of the directors and officers of the organization to try to get as much money as possible from not only the nonprofit, but also from the actual directors and officers, their homes, their cottages, their everything, their personal wealth. So it can get pretty ugly pretty fast. So again, board question here. Do the board members fully understand their liability exposure? Do we have adequate D&O, fiduciary, and indemnification provisions? So just again, doubling down on do we have the right risk management program in place?
I just want to add a little bit here. I think the younger nonprofits, this one seems to slip through the cracks a little bit. You put your volunteer board together, everybody's chugging along, and then they don't think about this. And then, it's really a relatively low cost insurance, relatively speaking, and for the amount of protection that it gives you, I think it's one of those things that you just need to check the box and get in place sooner than later. Young nonprofits, especially, I would hope that more mature nonprofits would already have this in place. But I've been surprised too that suddenly it pops up 15 years down the road. Like, well, we never thought of that. And yep. So, just a good reminder, Brad, and thanks for bringing it up.
Yep, you bet. In the essence of time, actually, we basically already covered this, the insurance gap piece, right? This is understanding, do you have cyber coverage? Do you have EPLI, which is employment practices liability insurance? Do you have fiduciary coverage, right? We all have a fiduciary responsibility to especially nonprofits. So is all that coverage in place? The board question here, when was the last time we did a full risk versus coverage audit? What changed in our operations that might render our current insurance insufficient? This happens most often when a nonprofit expands the services that they offer into a space that they hadn't previously worked in. So let's say you expand to virtual and digital services, and you've never done that before, but you don't think about or review your cyber insurance or privacy policies in order to make sure that you're properly covered for the virtual and or digital services that you're going to be offering, right? Let's say you're suddenly going to offer website design. I don't know why you would do that, but let's just say you're going to do that. Maybe you do. But you haven't reviewed your cyber coverage to make sure that it covers you as a person who's going to be providing a service and have access to another organization's network and have logins and passwords to get into their quote unquote systems. So that could be an example, but there are probably better ones that I just can't think of off the top of my head. But at the end of the day, the important piece here is if you're expanding into new areas, make sure the new areas are covered by your risk management program, and even make sure that the existing areas that you're in are covered by your insurance program. Just to hit back to the volunteer accident and auto liability, that is something that is often overlooked. So again, it's reviewing to make sure we know exactly what their roles and responsibilities are in the nonprofit or in any organization, and make sure that we're classifying them correctly. There are some policies that they're included on, but a lot of people just assume that all of the policies cover volunteers. But in many cases, or in some cases, I should say, auto liability is a good example. You have to explicitly endorse. It has to be an endorsement on your policy to cover volunteers if they're traveling. Let's say Habitat for Humanity, for example. If you have a volunteer who's traveling to build, your business auto policy isn't going to automatically cover that volunteer. It would have to be an endorsement to your business auto policy to cover volunteers in the course of travel to the job site to do the build. This is what we basically just went through, and it's kind of just all in one nice place on a slide. So we talked about people and culture, we talked about financial safeguards, we talked about technology, we talked about leadership readiness, and put this all together, and it's what we call the architecture of resilience. They do sometimes stand alone, but certainly I would say they support each other. So I guess you could view it as, a chair, a four-legged chair, a four-legged stool. They all are supporting each other, but certainly they have their own independent processes and things that they do within your nonprofit. Very briefly, we'll go into each one. We've only got 10 minutes left, so I want to be mindful of the time that we're taking from you guys. Very briefly, we'll go into each of them. The people and culture one, again, do you have clear policies? Do you have clearly defined roles and responsibility for both staff and volunteers? And do your benefits and recognition align with retention? Again, it just goes back to talking about, are we effectively communicating and educating our employees on what's going on and what we're offering them to turn them into good consumers, and you want them to talk about your nonprofit highly in the communities that you're in order to help attract and retain people. Board question here, super simple. Are we investing in people to reduce risk and increase mission delivery? Financial safeguards, we already kind of talked about these, but do you have proper reserves? Are you doing a good job of scenario budgeting? So in this space, a general rule of thumb is, do you have 3 to 6 months of operating expenses available should you experience some sort of loss? This is something that also rings true. Again, most people think about it in the for-profit space, kind of like I talked about earlier. If some sort of catastrophic weather event takes out one of our facilities, business interruption is going to happen. So can we absorb that, and how are we ensuring that is something that's really important to think about. Insurance, like it kind of says here, insurance is a part of this, but you also have to look at self-insurance and emergency funds. So sometimes in nonprofits, you have to accept the fact that you're going to be self-insuring some things, right? Because you don't have the budget to insure everything. So are you willing to self-insure things at some sort of cost so that you don't have to have every single shelf and chair and desk covered under some sort of property coverage within your organization? Sometimes you might be okay with self-insuring something if the cost is minimal. So the board question here: how robust are our financial reserves, and have we stress tested our budget for a serious disruption?
Hey, Brad, I know you've got a couple more slides here, but with 8 minutes left, and I want to really make sure we can get done at 9. I just want to see if anybody's got any specific questions that they came into today hoping that they would get covered, if they haven't already been covered in the slides. We want to make sure, again, to be interactive with this wherever possible. We had a couple good questions, comments. Anything out there that you all were worried about coming in and wanted to hear an expert talk about or give an opinion on?
Yeah, I'm getting sick of hearing Brad talk. So if anyone has
you and me both.
I selfishly, of course, I loved the talk of the reserves on the prior slide, and how it plays into budgeting, and again, we're right in mid-season with that, starting talking about budgets with our nonprofits for the coming calendar year. I loved what you all were talking about with your HR services as kind of a complement to your insurance products. That's huge for nonprofits that are running tight on budget. And, if you can pay your premiums and get this additional service just for having a trusted partner, that seems almost like a no-brainer on some levels. And yes, this was not a planned sales pitch. McClone is not paying me any commissions if I get HR services over to them. That just seems like a really great service that they're providing there. Here we go. Miss Allison, thanks for throwing one out there. What level of D&O insurance should we have? Is $1 million enough? And I'm sure there's going to be a depends answer here, but go ahead, Brad or Jacob.
Yeah, it depends, but I would say $1 million is a really good starting point. And I would be hard pressed to, if your nonprofit is, if it's getting to the over, if you're a big nonprofit, over 100 employees, probably you need to look at maybe having a little bit more. But if you're under, there we go, we have 7 employees. Okay. Then you're in all likelihood, what I'll say is in all likelihood, $1 million is a really good spot to be. With 7 employees, I don't see a need to have more than $1 million in place, and partly because many times your other policies are going to be come into play here. So your management liability policies will come into play. Fiduciary might come into play. Depending upon what the claim is for, your general liability policy might come into play. So there are your umbrella might get looped into there if you have a good umbrella policy, right? A lot of times people will have, $1 million per occurrence umbrella, 2 million aggregate. So that might get tapped into as well. So really good question. I would say a general statement to make without knowing more about the particulars of any of the nonprofits, $1 million coverage for D&O is a really good spot.
Yeah. Would it somewhat depend on asset size too? Like if you had a big endowment, would you want to somehow protect that differently with insurance, or is that really not a factor?
Yeah, I would say that it is a factor. Again, without knowing the particulars about the size of it and what the nonprofit is doing and where the money is going, it's hard to say. But I would say certainly if suddenly, someone threw you $20 million unrestricted donation, or you had some sort of other large endowment, that would be a really good time to take a review of the risk management programs that you have in place, and make sure that they're adequate. Yeah. Good question.
Yeah. You mentioned one of the vision insurance being one of those, nice, easy to implement, and depending on how you break it up, employees might cover it, but it's a group policy kind of thing. What other little add-on type benefits are you seeing as a trend,
good question.
Over, going into the coming year to try and, keep retention?
Two actually come. That's a really good question, and I would say 90% of our clients in the for-profit and nonprofit space ask us that same thing. Two come to mind, and one is kind of ties into the cyber insurance, but it's LifeLock or some sort of other personal protection. Right. A lot of times, honestly, the cost of that is such that the employer can cover the cost of it. Because if you go to, actually, I'll be transparent with you. At the beginning of this year, McClone started offering it so like ID theft protection, they offered it to all their employees at no cost. So you can go and enroll in the coverage. I think the company we use is called Aura, A-U-R-A. I'm not getting paid to tell you that. It's just who we thought was the best partner for it. So ID theft is a big one. Just particularly, you see it on the news every night, right? People are targeting whoever they need to target to try to get money from them. And then the other big one actually is lifestyle savings accounts. So a lot of companies will have health savings accounts. And what the health savings account is, it can be a vehicle to save money for retirement, but it can also be used just like a flex spending account for medical expenses. But sometimes the things that are covered are a little bit more restricted. So a lot of companies, and again, I'll transparently use McClone as an example here. We actually started using a lifestyle savings account at the beginning of this year. And what we found is that everyone's needs from a mental, financial, emotional wellness standpoint are different, right? Mm-hmm. And covering a gym membership, great. But what if that doesn't fit into your lifestyle? What if going to the gym just isn't for you? What if you work out at home, right? As an example, so we started a lifestyle savings account. It can be used for gym memberships, but it can also be used for hundreds of other things. It can be used, you can buy a new pair of walking shoes. You can buy a bike. You can buy, just about anything that you can think of under the sun that can somehow be tied to your mental, physical, and emotional wellness. And the employer funds it, right? So, but you could fund it to whatever level you want. But I would say the LSA, lifestyle savings account, is something that a lot of people do. And I know we only have a minute left, but a lot of times people gravitate toward pet insurance because there was a time a few years ago where everyone was saying, oh, we need pet insurance, pet insurance, pet insurance, pet insurance. Everyone wanted to offer pet insurance. And pet insurance is great, but you have to be really careful about the pet insurance and what you set up, because a lot of times there are a lot of exclusions in pet insurance. I'll give one really good example that happens sometimes. In most pet insurance policies, golden retrievers are, I guess, known for having a lot of joint problems. A lot of times joint problems for a certain breed of dog are exclusions in pet insurance policies, but nobody takes the time to look at it. So just saying we need pet insurance because everyone's asking to cover their dog and cat and chameleon and whatever else. A good idea sometimes, but again, it's about taking an assessment to see what really works for you guys.
Jacob, Brad, thanks so much for your time today. Stephanie Hayden, you're the winner of the Amazon gift card this time. And we're up next on November 11th with Jeff Femright from Shoals Nonprofit Law. So everybody have a great day. Thank you for your time today and hope to see you down